RIP to the Drake stans. Can only imagine what that feels like. Well, I really couldn't.
What happens when the biggest name in hip-hop drops a new album, and suddenly the entire industry feels like it shifts overnight? Because this isn't just music anymore. This is pressure, ego, respect, and the kind of silent tension that builds when success becomes too loud for everyone else to ignore. And at the center of it all, once again, is Drake. The same artist who dominates charts, breaks streaming records, and turns every release into a global event. But this time, something feels different. Right after the album dropped, the energy around him didn't feel like celebration. It felt like change. Whispers started spreading. Old rivals started resurfacing. New tensions started building in unexpected places. Then the rumors hit. Backstage arguments, unexpected confrontations, industry pressure building behind closed doors, and the idea that not everyone was happy seeing Drake take over the conversation again. But what really shocked people wasn't just the rumors. It was how fast the situation escalated online. Fans started re-watching old interviews. Old diss tracks suddenly felt relevant again. Every lyric started sounding like a hidden warning. And every small interaction turned into evidence of something bigger happening behind the scenes. Because in hip-hop, success doesn't just create fans, it creates pressure. And when one artist stays on top for too long, the industry doesn't always stay quiet. It reacts. Now people are asking the same question everywhere. Was this just internet hype blowing things out of proportion? Or did Drake really trigger something in the industry that went far beyond music this time? Everything shifts in the hip-hop world right after one album drops, and suddenly the entire industry starts feeling different around Drake. At first, nothing looks unusual. A new album drops. Streaming numbers go crazy. Social media explodes. Fans celebrate. Critics debate. And once again, Drake is at the center of global attention. That's normal. That's expected. Because when Drake releases music, it doesn't feel like just another project. It feels like an event that takes over the internet for days. But this time, something feels slightly off. Not in the music itself. Not in the production, not even in the reception, but in the energy around it. Because right after the album drops, fans start noticing something strange. Not everyone is celebrating. Some artists stay silent. Some reactions feel delayed. Some responses feel indirect. And some parts of the industry feel unusually quiet. And in hip-hop, silence is never just silence. It becomes a signal. That's where the speculation begins. People start asking, why are certain names not reacting? Why does it feel like the usual excitement is missing from certain corners of the industry? And once that question enters the conversation, it spreads fast. Now suddenly, every detail matters. Old interviews are pulled back up. Old lyrics are reanalyzed. Old friendships are re-examined. Old moments that nobody cared about suddenly look important. Because that's how internet culture works. It doesn't wait for answers. It builds theories. And at the center of all these theories is still Drake, an artist who has spent years dominating charts, breaking streaming records, and shaping global rap culture. But also an artist who naturally becomes the focal point of competition, comparison, and industry tension. So when fans start feeling a shift after the album release, they don't see it as random. They see it as a reaction to success, a reaction to dominance, a reaction to influence that keeps growing no matter what. And that's when the internet starts building its own storyline. Some fans claim there's quiet pressure building behind the scenes. Some say certain artists are uncomfortable with how big Drake still is. Some even suggest that the industry is slowly splitting into invisible sides. No proof, no confirmation, just interpretation. But that's enough for the internet. Because once a narrative forms, it spreads faster than facts. Every lyric becomes a potential message. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every casual post becomes a decoded signal. Even interviews that have nothing to do with the album start getting clipped and analyzed like evidence. And suddenly, the conversation is no longer about music quality. It becomes about industry temperature. Who's happy? Who's silent? Who's reacting indirectly? Who might be sending energy without saying names? That's where things start getting deeper. Because Drake isn't just another artist in this situation. is the center of attention in a space where attention automatically creates tension. And the more successful an artist becomes, the more everything around them gets interpreted as competition. Even friendship, even silence, even normal behavior. Fans start bringing up old rivalries again. Not because anything new happened, but because the album gave them a reason to reopen old conversations. Now the internet is full of timelines, comparisons, theories, and what-if scenarios. And once that starts happening, things rarely stay online. Because in hip-hop culture, perception matters almost as much as reality. If people believe something is happening behind the scenes, it starts influencing how they view every future move. And that's exactly where this story begins. Not with a fight, not with a confirmed incident, not with official drama, but with something much more powerful in today's world. A shift in perception around Drake that turns a normal album release into the beginning of a much bigger conversation. The story moves from online speculation into something that feels more intense. Because once the album conversation around Drake starts spreading, the internet doesn't just talk about music anymore, it starts building narratives around power, respect, and hidden tension in hip-hop. And that's when things start getting louder. Because fans notice something they always notice in situations like this: patterns. Certain reactions feel colder than expected. Certain silence feels too intentional. Certain posts feel indirect. And certain names that usually engage with big releases don't show the usual energy. Now again, none of this is confirmed. No official statements. No verified conflict. No direct evidence of anything happening behind the scenes. But that doesn't stop the internet from connecting dots. Because once Drake becomes the center of attention after a major release, everything around him gets interpreted through a competitive lens. And that's where old history starts coming back into the conversation. People begin revisiting past moments, not because they are new, but because they now feel relevant again. Old interviews where artists hinted at frustration, old lyrics that sounded competitive, old award show moments that felt slightly tense in hindsight. Even collaborations that never happened start getting treated like missing pieces of a bigger story. The internet does what it always does. It builds a timeline out of memory and emotion. And suddenly, every small detail becomes part of a larger theory. Some fans start saying the industry feels divided. Others say it feels like there is quiet competition energy building again. A few even argue that success at Drake's level naturally creates resistance. Not always direct, but subtle, indirect, and emotional. Because in hip-hop, dominance is never neutral. It always creates reactions. And Drake is one of the few artists whose influence stretches across multiple generations of rap. That kind of position automatically puts him in a unique place where every release is measured not just as music, but as a statement. And that's where things start to feel heavier. Because fans begin analyzing everything through that lens. A simple silence becomes calculated. A vague tweet becomes a response. A lyric becomes a message. And suddenly, everyone is trying to decode what is happening behind the scenes without any official confirmation of anything at all. But the most dangerous part of this situation is how fast imagination spreads. Because once people believe there is tension, they don't wait for proof. They build narratives around possibility. And that's when the story starts expanding beyond Drake himself. Old rivalries are mentioned again, especially conversations involving Kendrick Lamar. Even if nothing new has actually happened, past moments are pulled into present discussions, making it feel like everything is connected even when it's not. That's how internet culture turns music releases into cultural debates. Not just did you like the album, but what does this mean for the industry? Who is reacting without speaking? Who is staying silent and why? And once those questions start spreading, the conversation stops being about art and starts becoming about power perception. That's the key shift. Because now Drake is no longer just an artist releasing music. He becomes a symbol in the internet's imagination of how the industry reacts to dominance. Even neutral moments get reinterpreted. A casual appearance becomes analysis material. A lack of comment becomes proof of tension. A congratulatory message becomes strategic. And that's where misinformation and speculation blend together so easily that fans themselves start building entire storylines without realizing how little of it is actually confirmed. Meanwhile, inside the real industry, most of what's happening is likely much simpler. Artists focusing on their own releases, schedules, and projects. But online, simplicity never survives. Because complexity is more entertaining, and drama spreads faster than reality. So as the album continues circulating and dominating streaming platforms, the narrative around it grows larger than the music itself. It becomes about influence. It becomes about reaction. It becomes about perceived respect. And every new day adds another layer of interpretation from fans trying to make sense of silence, timing, and energy shifts. But the truth is still the same as part one. Nothing officially confirmed. Nothing publicly stated. Just perception turning into story. And now, as this perception continues to grow, the situation feels like it's moving towards something bigger. Not necessarily conflict, but escalation in public narrative. And that's where part 3 begins, where the speculation starts becoming even louder, and the internet pushes the story even further into theory territory. The conversation around Drake has completely moved beyond music reviews and online debates. It's now fully inside internet narrative mode, where every small detail gets treated like part of a much bigger hidden storyline. And this is where things start getting more chaotic. Because once a theory spreads far enough, people stop asking, is this true? And start asking, what if it is? At this stage, the album isn't just an album anymore. It's a symbol people are projecting their own ideas onto. Fans begin dissecting everything. Not just lyrics, but timing. Not just features, but absences. Not just reactions, but silence. And silence, in this kind of environment, becomes the loudest thing of all. Because when Drake drops a major project and certain expected reactions don't come immediately or publicly, the internet doesn't interpret it as normal delay. It interprets it as meaning. And meaning spreads fast. People start forming different layers of interpretation. One group says it's just music industry routine, artists focusing on their own releases. Another group says it's subtle competitive tension. Another group believes it's emotional distance turning into professional separation. And another group takes it even further, suggesting there are invisible lines being drawn in hip-hop culture whenever a dominant figure drops something major. None of this is confirmed, but that doesn't stop it from growing. Because in modern rap culture, perception often travels faster than reality. And once perception becomes strong enough, it starts influencing how people read everything afterward. That's when old history gets dragged back in again. People start revisiting moments involving Drake and past industry interactions that had nothing to do with the current album, but suddenly feel connected in hindsight. Old interviews get clipped again. Old lyrics get re-examined. Old award show reactions get analyzed frame by frame. Even collaborations that never happened are brought into discussion as missed signals of deeper industry dynamics. This is where the internet becomes a machine that builds continuity where there might not be any. And the more people participate, the more real the narrative feels, even without evidence. Now things also start expanding outward. Because once Drake is positioned at the center of this kind of discussion, other names inevitably get pulled into it, especially long-time rap comparisons involving Kendrick Lamar. Again, not because anything new has happened, but because the internet uses familiar rivalries as structure to understand current moments. So the conversation shifts from Drake released an album to, what does this mean in the bigger rap hierarchy? Who responds to who? Who stays silent and why? Is this part of a larger competitive cycle? And suddenly, a music release becomes a cultural investigation. But here's the important part. Most of this exists only in interpretation. There are no official confirmations of any of the tension theories being discussed online. There are no verified incidents tied to the album release suggesting real-world escalation. What exists is a digital environment where fans collectively build meaning from timing, silence, and emotion. Still, perception has power, because even without confirmation, it affects how people talk about artists, how narratives form around them, and how future releases are interpreted. And that's where things get more layered for Drake specifically. Because at his level of fame, everything becomes amplified. A small reaction becomes a headline. A lack of reaction becomes a theory. A neutral moment becomes a coded message. And the pressure isn't just from critics, it's from constant global observation. Every move is watched. Every silence is filled. Every release is dissected. And that creates a cycle where the story around the artist often becomes bigger than the music itself. At this point in the narrative, the internet is no longer reacting to the album. It's reacting to its imagined impact. And that's a completely different thing. Because imagined impact can grow endlessly without limits. It can connect unrelated events. It can revive old conflicts. It can assign meaning where none was intended. And as this narrative continues to spread, fans begin preparing for what they think might come next. Not because anything is confirmed, but because the story has now reached that familiar stage where people expect escalation. But whether escalation is real or not is still unanswered. And that uncertainty is exactly what pushes the story into Part 5, where perception, rumor, and fan interpretation all collide at their peak, and the line between reality and narrative becomes even harder to see. The entire conversation around Drake has evolved into something much bigger than an album rollout, reactions, or even industry speculation. It has become a full-blown internet narrative, where perception, rumor, and interpretation start blending into one continuous storyline that fans across social media keep expanding in real time. And at this stage, the original music is almost no longer the center of attention. Instead, the focus is on what people believe the music represents. Because in this final phase of online culture, meaning often matters more than fact. And that's exactly what's happening here. Fans are no longer just discussing the album itself. They're discussing its supposed impact on the entire hip-hop ecosystem. Every small detail that was once ignored is now being reinterpreted. A delayed reaction is seen as intentional silence. A neutral post is seen as coded messaging. A lack of public support is seen as hidden tension. And none of it requires confirmation for it to spread. Because once a narrative reaches this level, it becomes self-sustaining. People start repeating what they've heard from other fans. Those interpretations get amplified, and eventually, the line between observation and assumption disappears completely. That's why Drake ends up at the center of so many overlapping theories, not because of one specific event, but because of the scale of attention surrounding him. At his level of fame, silence is never empty. It gets filled instantly by interpretation. And in this case, the internet filled it with ideas about shifting energy in the industry, changing dynamics between artists, and the possibility that major releases naturally create invisible waves of reaction across hip-hop. But again, none of this is confirmed. None of it is officially stated. None of it is grounded in verified events. What exists instead is perception, and perception spreads faster than truth. As the discussions continue, fans begin building entire timelines, connecting old moments with new ones, even when they were never meant to be connected. Past rivalries get revived in conversation. Old collaborations are reevaluated. Even unrelated artists get pulled into comparisons simply because their names have appeared in similar discussions before. And this is where Kendrick Lamar re-enters the conversation online, not because of any confirmed action or response, but because the internet naturally brings him into any large-scale Drake-related discussion due to historical context and fan memory. That's how narratives expand, not through new facts, but through old associations being reused in new situations. Meanwhile, the most important shift happening here is psychological, not factual. Because once a large audience believes there is tension or movement behind the scenes, they begin reacting to that belief as if it were reality. They read lyrics differently. They interpret silence differently. They expect responses that may never come. And in doing so, they create a parallel version of events that exists entirely in online discourse. This is where modern hip-hop culture becomes different from earlier eras. Because today, every album doesn't just exist as music, it exists as data for interpretation. And Drake sits in a position where his releases naturally generate that level of analysis due to his influence and visibility. But the important reality underneath all of this is simple. Most of what fans are reacting to is not action. It is interpretation of silence, timing, and cultural memory. Still, the story feels real to people because it's emotionally engaging. And emotional narratives are more powerful than factual ones in online spaces. That's why the discussion keeps growing even without new developments. People don't need confirmation to continue the conversation. They only need possibility, and possibility is infinite. At this point, the narrative has reached its peak not because something definitive has happened, but because the internet has fully committed to the idea that something might be happening beneath the surface. And once that happens, every new day feels like a continuation of the same unfolding story, even when nothing actually changes. So what remains at the end of all this? Not proof, not confirmation, not resolution, but interpretation. A layered, constantly expanding interpretation of an album, an artist, and an industry that fans believe is always in motion, even when it's not visibly changing. And that's the final truth of this story. In today's hip-hop culture, the narrative doesn't end when the music stops. It ends when the internet stops imagining what comes next. So after everything you've just seen, the reactions, the theories, the silence, and the internet turning one album into a full-blown story around Drake, the real question is simple. Where does truth end? And where does online narrative begin? Because in today's hip-hop culture, nothing stays just music anymore. Every release becomes a conversation. Every silence becomes a theory. Every reaction becomes content for millions of opinions. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think this was just fans overthinking everything and creating drama where there was none? Or do you believe there really is something deeper happening behind the scenes in the industry that people are picking up on? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which part shocked you the most? And which theory do you think is actually real? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because in hip-hop, every new drop doesn't just bring music, it brings a whole new story that the internet will rewrite again and again.